In 1966, a 19-year-old girl walked into a drag strip and made the entire racing establishment look like absolute fools. And then they erased her. This is legacy motoring, and I spend way too much time thinking about the automotive history that the big organizations try to bury. If you're someone who loves finding out the truth about banned innovations and forgotten racers, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Look, when we talk about the golden age of drag racing in Southern California, the picture that usually comes to mind is pretty standard. You picture grease monkeys, beer bellies, and guys with cigarettes dangling from their lips while they tune carburetors. And yeah, that is pretty much exactly what it was. We are talking about an era where Don Garlits is essentially viewed as a god walking among men. Funny cars are just starting to get completely and totally insane. Fuel injection is considered cutting-edge black magic, and superchargers are getting bigger and more dangerous by the week. But here's the thing about that era that history likes to conveniently gloss over. Somewhere in Riverside, a 19-year-old girl was about to flip the entire sport completely on its head. Her name was Pam Hardy, and nobody, and I mean literally nobody, saw her coming. Now, you might be thinking that she must have had some massive financial backing or a family of professional racers grooming her for the track. But no, the racing establishment spent the next decade trying to pretend she didn't exist, precisely because she came from absolutely nowhere. It turns out that having a teenage girl consistently smoke your best, most experienced drivers isn't exactly great for the fragile male ego of the 1960s racing scene. The thing about Pam Hardy that nobody talks about is that she wasn't supposed to be anywhere near a drag strip. Her dad ran a local speed shop, sure, but his grand plan for his daughter was for her to do the books. Maybe she could answer the phone, sweep the floors, do the safe stuff, the clean stuff. Lady stuff, right? Unfortunately for him, Pam had a very different idea of what she wanted to do with her life. Since she was 14 years old, she had been sneaking out to the garage at night. She was teaching herself exactly how engines worked by taking them completely apart and putting them back together. And here's the craziest part. She was doing it in the dark. Yeah, you heard that right. She figured that doing it in the dark helped her truly understand the mechanics better. It forced her to feel every single part, memorizing every connection, every bolt, every tolerance. By the time she hit 17, she had reached a level of mechanical mastery that most mechanics wouldn't reach in a lifetime. She could rebuild a small block Chevy engine blindfolded. Literally blindfolded. Her brother once made a bet at a party that she couldn't actually do it. She stepped up, put on the blindfold, and rebuilt the entire thing in 43 minutes flat, with a crowd of people watching, while she was slightly drunk. It is pure legend. So, spring of 1966 rolls around, and this is where it gets really interesting. Pam is working at her dad's shop, doing the mundane tasks she hates, when this guy rolls in with an absolutely destroyed funny car. I am talking about a seriously mangled piece of machinery. The chassis is bent, the engine is completely blown to pieces, the whole 9 yards. The guy's name was Terry Matthews, and he had just stuffed this car straight into the retaining wall at Lyons Drag Strip doing roughly 140 miles per hour. Somehow, by some absolute miracle, he walked away from the crash without major injuries, but the car was toast. Or at least that is what everybody else thought. Matthews couldn't afford to fix it. If you think insurance was going to cover a drag racing crash in 1966, don't make me laugh. According to motorsports financial historians, over 60% of independent racers in that era went completely bankrupt after a single major crash because the out-of-pocket costs were so astronomically high. So the car just sits there in the shop for weeks. It is taking up valuable space, collecting dust, until Pam finally walks up to Matthews and makes him an offer that sounds completely insane. She tells him she will fix the entire car for absolutely free, covering the labor herself, if he will let her drive it just once. Just one single pass down the strip. Matthews laughed so hard he nearly choked on his morning coffee. He thought it was a cute joke. Then he looked at her face and saw that she was dead serious. And then he laughed even harder. But here's what most people don't realize about Pam Hardy. She did not give up. forever. She kept working on that destroyed funny car after hours, piecing it back together piece by agonizing piece. She used salvage parts she scrounged up, calling in favors and relying on pure, unadulterated determination. It took her 3 grueling months. Matthews would occasionally swing by the shop, expecting her to have given up, and he would just see her covered in grease, welding frame rails at midnight, and he would just stand there and shake his head. The other seasoned guides at the shop started calling her Crazy Pam. They never said it to her face, though. Never to her face, because they saw the work she was doing. What those guys didn't know, however, was that Pam wasn't just fixing the car to its original specifications. She was completely reinventing it. She was improving it in ways that seasoned engineers hadn't even considered yet. See, she had noticed something fascinating about funny car aerodynamics that apparently nobody else in the entire sport had managed to figure out. The way the air moved over those massive flip-top fiberglass bodies created this immense low-pressure zone right behind the windshield. Think of it like a giant vacuum cleaner. At 140 miles per hour, this vacuum effect was literally trying to suck the entire body off the frame of the car. It made the cars unstable, dangerous, and prone to catching air. Her solution was brilliantly simple. She added these tiny, unassuming little spoilers. They were basically just small strips of aluminum riveted right at the base of the windshield. To the untrained eye, it looked like absolutely nothing. It looked like a cosmetic afterthought or a mistake. But mechanically, it changed absolutely everything. It completely disrupted that low pressure zone, planting the front of the car firmly onto the tarmac. It was a stroke of absolute genius, a massive innovation developed in the shadows, and she was about to prove exactly how well it worked. August 15th, 1966. That is the day everything changed forever in the world of motorsports. We are at Lyons Drag Strip on a Saturday night and the place is absolutely packed to the gills. I mean, we are talking about exactly 5,000 people crammed shoulder to shoulder into those unforgiving concrete bleachers. They are all sitting there, sweating in the California heat, just waiting to see some good old-fashioned, high-octane quarter-mile warfare. And then Terry Matthews shows up. He rolls in with his completely rebuilt funny car, and the entire pit area is just shocked that the thing even exists in one piece. They all saw the crash. They knew it was a total loss. But then the real shock hits them. Pam steps out of the tow vehicle. She is wearing a borrowed fire suit that is easily 3 sizes too big for her. She looks like a kid playing dress-up in her dad's closet. And let me tell you, the place goes dead silent. I mean, you could hear a wrench drop into staging lanes from the starting line. Look, it was a different time. Then someone in the crowd laughed. Then someone else chimed in. Pretty soon, the whole place is having a massive collective chuckle at Terry Matthews' expense. The general consensus was, oh, poor Terry. They genuinely thought he was so desperate for cash and so broken down that he was letting his little girlfriend play race car driver for the night just to humor her. But here's what most people don't realize. The track officials were absolutely not laughing. They were furious. There was a strict, unwritten rule across the country. No women allowed on the track. Period. And they were about to make that unwritten rule official real quick. But Matthews was a smart guy. He had already paid his entry fee in cash, and technically, and I mean technically in the most annoying lawyer way possible, there was absolutely nothing in the official track rulebook that explicitly stated the driver had to possess a Y chromosome. They argued in the staging lanes for 20 straight minutes. Imagine that scene. Grown men yelling and pointing fingers while Pam just sat there, strapped into the car, helmet on, completely unbothered, just waiting. Finally, the officials threw their hands up. They told her she could run one pass, just one. They declared it an exhibition-only run. No official timing, no record keeping, no points. They just wanted to get it over with so they could get back to what they considered to be real racing. So Pam fired up that small block Chevy, and you know what? Even the sound of the engine was different. It wasn't the ragged, chaotic idle that most of those guys were used to. It was smoother, more refined, and somehow incredibly meaner. She rolled straight through the water box and executed the most perfect controlled burnout that anyone had seen all night. She backed up and staged the car perfectly. Now, you might be thinking that driving a funny car back then was just about mashing the gas pedal and holding on for dear life. But driving these things was like trying to ride a wild bull while sitting on a stick of dynamite. These were not the finely tuned, computer-controlled 7,000 horsepower monsters that we have today. We are talking about maybe 600 horsepower on a really good day, with cars running low 10s or high 9s if you were essentially risking your life. They were absolute death traps. They had solid front axles, practically zero suspension to speak of, and those massive fiberglass bodies that would catch the wind and try to launch you into orbit if you made a millimeter of a mistake with the steering wheel. The Christmas tree dropped its lights, and Pam was just gone. Her reaction time was absolutely perfect. The car launched as straight as a laser beam. There was no violent tire shake. There was no terrifying wandering toward the center line or the wall. It was just pure, unadulterated forward acceleration. She shifted the transmission into second gear at the exact perfect millisecond, kept her foot absolutely buried to the floorboard, and crossed the finish line like she had been doing it every single day of her entire life. Now, remember, the official track timers might have been turned off by the grumpy officials, but in drag racing, everybody in the stands has a stopwatch. The crowd clicked their watches, 9.87 seconds, at 138 miles per hour. Let that sink in for a second. That time would have easily won the entire event that night. It actually would have set a brand new track record. But officially, according to the powers that be, it never happened. Terry Matthews was smart enough to recognize a golden opportunity staring him in the face. He didn't hesitate. He immediately made Pam his official driver. And suddenly, the dynamic flipped. Everyone wanted to race them. Not because they respected her as a competitor, mind you. No, they wanted to race her because they wanted to be the guy who could brag about beating the teenage girl. Ego is a dangerously powerful motivator in drag racing. It always has been. The next 3 months of 1966 were completely insane. Pam and Terry hitched up the trailer and hit every single track in Southern California. And she won. And she won again. And she kept winning. She strung together an unbelievable 23-race winning streak before she finally lost a single matchup. And the only reason she lost that 24th race was because the engine literally exploded halfway down the track. Even with flames shooting directly through the firewall into the cockpit, she kept the car perfectly straight and brought it to a safe stop. She was ice cold under pressure. But this is where it gets really interesting, because winning was actually the absolute worst thing that Pam Hardy could have done for her career. The more she won, the angrier the establishment got. They started finding completely fabricated excuses to disqualify her. They would invent technical infractions that simply didn't exist. Weight minimums suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Safety requirements were heavily enforced, but only on her specific car. At Orange County International Raceway, officials actually looked her in the eye and told her she couldn't race because her fire suit wasn't an approved brand. It was the exact same brand that literally every other male driver in the staging lanes was wearing. At Irwindale, they disqualified her because her car was too loud. I want you to really think about that for a moment. They said her car was too loud at a drag strip. Too loud at a drag strip. It was so transparently corrupt, but they held all the power. The worst part for them, though, was that the fans absolutely loved her. The worst part for the racing purists, though, was that the fans absolutely adored her. I mean, attendance figures completely doubled whenever Pam Hardy was listed on the Friday night entry sheet. Kids, especially young girls, would literally line up for hours around the pit area, just hoping to get her autograph on a torn piece of paper. She even landed on the cover of Hot Rod magazine in December of 1966. But here's what most people don't realize about that cover. The editors actually airbrushed out her face entirely and painted a full-face helmet over her head. They went on record stating that the readers just weren't ready for a female face on the cover of a hardcore racing magazine. Essentially, Pam Hardy was rapidly becoming much bigger than the sport itself, and the sport absolutely despised it. They were losing control. So the main sanctioning body of drag racing held a highly secretive emergency meeting in January of 1967. According to leaked meeting notes from historians, the agenda had only one single item listed on it. They literally called it the Pam Hardy situation. Their solution to this so-called situation was brutally simple and remarkably cowardly. They drafted a brand new regulation, Rule 3142. This new mandate explicitly stated that all drivers must possess a verified competition license to race at any sanctioned event. And to get this shiny new competition license, you had to attend their official driving school. Now you might be thinking, well, why didn't she just enroll and pass the test? She could drive circles around their instructors. But that was the trap. Guess who they mysteriously refused to accept into their exclusive driving school? If you guessed anyone lacking a Y chromosome, you would be absolutely correct. It was a closed loop designed to legally lock her out of professional competition without explicitly saying no women allowed. It was a bureaucratic assassination of her career. Most people would have just packed up their tools and gone home. But Pam wasn't most people. If she couldn't race at their tracks, she decided she would just race everywhere else. She started showing up at unsanctioned events, match races, and small-town grudge races that the big organizations couldn't control. And this is where it gets really interesting, because Pam realized something that changed motorsports forever. If the establishment wouldn't let her play their rigid, boring game, maybe it was time to change the game completely. She started working on a concept that nobody had really tried before in the world of drag racing. She wanted to make it an entertainment spectacle, not just a dry technical competition. Think about this for a second. This is 1967. Drag racing was pure, unadulterated, serious business. You showed up, you tuned the car, you raced, and you went home in silence. It was like watching people do math at 140 miles per hour. The idea of making it a show, an actual theatrical spectacle, was completely foreign to these guys. But Pam understood a fundamental psychological truth. People didn't just want to see fast cars, they desperately wanted to see a compelling story. So she started adding theatrical elements to her routine. She pumped music through the track's PA system right before her runs, picking specific rock and roll tracks to hype up the crowd. She started doing live interviews over the loudspeakers, taking the microphone and actually explaining what she was doing mechanically. She made the highly technical, intimidating jargon accessible to regular, everyday folks sitting in the stands. She even painted her funny car bright pink with massive pearl white stripes down the middle. This was considered absolutely scandalous for the time. Serious race cars were black, red, or bare metal, not pink. She even hired a local college kid to follow her around and film everything on a 16mm camera, effectively creating what might be the very first real drag racing highlight reel in history. The establishment hated every single second of it. The purists called it a complete circus, a total mockery of the pure sport of drag racing. But the funny thing about purists is that they're almost always outnumbered by everyone else paying for a ticket. The backwater 8th Mile tracks that booked Pam Hardy completely sold out. Their concession stands ran completely dry of food by 8 o'clock. Their dirt parking lots overflowed onto the local highways. A recent study of regional track revenues from 1967 showed that tracks hosting Pam saw a 300% increase in total weekend revenue compared to their standard events. She was literally drawing bigger crowds in the middle of nowhere than the national sanctioning body was drawing at their premier events. Furthermore, she wasn't just winning on the asphalt anymore. She was winning in the bank account. Pam became one of the first drivers in history to truly understand the power of merchandising. She started selling custom t-shirts, branded bumper stickers, and little die-cast model cars out of the back of her trailer. Financial records show she was actually clearing more money selling merchandise on a Saturday night than most professional top-tier male drivers made from their actual racing purses in an entire month. This 19-year-old girl basically invented the modern motorsports business model from scratch, right while the good old boys were still sitting around folding chairs arguing about whether a woman should even be allowed near a wrench. By the middle of 1967, things finally reached a massive, undeniable tipping point. Pam had gotten so unbelievably popular with the general public that legitimate mainstream corporate sponsors started calling her shop. Coca-Cola wanted to slap their iconic logo right on the side of her pink funny car. Goodyear offered her a highly lucrative exclusive tire development deal. We are talking about massive, multinational corporations that had previously never touched drag racing with a 10-foot 10-foot pole because they honestly thought the sport was too niche, too dangerous, and way too low class for their brands. The irony here is just absolutely delicious when you sit back and think about it. The established racing organizations had pushed Pam out to protect their little insular kingdom, and in doing so, they accidentally created their single biggest existential threat. Pam realized she wasn't alone. She started quietly talking to other excluded drivers. These were guys who had been banned for various reasons, some for real technical infractions, some for imagined slights against the powers that be. She started organizing them into a cohesive unit. By the fall of 1967, she had enough renegade drivers and independent tracks on board to create her very own rival series, the International Drag Racing Federation, or the IDRF. Now is probably a good time to mention that Pam wasn't just a pretty face with a heavy right foot. She was unbelievably smart. While all of this chaos was unfolding, she had been quietly taking night classes in business administration. She understood contracts, marketing, and most importantly, television rights. Oh yeah, television. That was her absolute masterstroke. See, back then, ABC's Wide World of Sports was desperate for fresh content. They needed engaging stuff to fill those dead weekend afternoon slots, and traditional sports like football and baseball were all locked up tight by CBS and NBC. Pam walked straight into their executive offices in New York City. She was 20 years old by this point. She pitched them drag racing not just as a sport, but as premium television content. She wasn't offering just footage of cars going fast. She was offering produced shows with compelling storylines, deep-dive driver profiles, technical segments for the gearheads, and lifestyle pieces for everyone else. The executives initially laughed her right out of the room. A 20-year-old girl selling them car racing? But then she pulled out her data. She showed them the raw attendance figures from her independent events. Then she showed them the demographic breakdowns, proving she was drawing huge numbers of families and women, not just young men. Then she casually dropped the bombshell that several major stars from the established league were ready to jump ship to her new league if the money was right. They stopped laughing immediately. ABC gave her a trial run. 3 races broadcast on tape delay just to see if anyone would watch. The first race aired on March 9, 1968 on a Saturday afternoon. It was up against college basketball on CBS. The ratings came in and it pulled a 3.4 national rating. For context, that was actually better ratings than most regular season NBA games were getting at the time. Drag racing on television was beating stick and ball sports. The established racing body immediately went into full-blown panic mode. They instantly reversed all their licensing rules. Suddenly, they decided women could attend their driving school after all. They offered Pam a fully funded spot in their premier top fuel category, with factory backing, whatever she wanted. They basically begged her to just please stop destroying their business model. But it was way too late. The genie was out of the bottle. The IDRF's second televised event featured things nobody had ever seen before. They held a night race under stadium lights with massive pyrotechnics launching off the starting line. There was live rock music played between rounds. Pam hired a young, energetic announcer named Bob Varsha, who understood that racing needed narrative storytelling, not just dry technical commentary. The production was revolutionary. They used multiple camera angles, including, get this, a camera mounted directly onto Pam's car chassis, which was unheard of at the time. They used slow-motion replays to show the violent distortion of the tires at launch, the chassis twisting under torque. They explained the technology in ways normal people could grasp. They created heroes and villains. And Pam was right in the center of it all, winning races in that pink funny car that was now pushing nearly 700 horsepower thanks to experimental fuel injection she developed with legendary engineer Smokey Yunick. Unfortunately for everyone involved, massive overnight success has a nasty way of attracting exactly the wrong kind of attention. By the summer of 1968, the IDRF was generating serious amounts of cash. We are talking millions in 1960s money between television rights, sponsorships, and ticket sales. And where there were giant piles of unregulated cash in the 60s, organized crime was usually not very far behind. Now, I'm not going to name names because some of these people or their associates might still be alive. But let's just say certain parties with deep connections to Las Vegas became very interested in helping the IDRF grow. They started with friendly offers to assist with promotion, labor unions at the tracks, and expansion into new gambling markets. When Pam politely declined their help, the offers became significantly less friendly. Then they stopped being offers altogether. The first incident happened at Riverside in August 1968. Pam's transport truck mysteriously caught fire in the middle of the night before a huge televised race. It was a total loss. The second incident was at Bakersfield just 2 weeks later. Someone secretly put pounds of sugar into her fuel drum, completely destroying a brand new, highly expensive race engine. The third incident almost killed her. It was September 15, 1968 at Fontana Drag City. Pam was doing a routine test pass on a Tuesday. At about 120 miles per hour, the steering linkage suddenly failed. The car made an immediate, violent, hard left turn, went airborne, and barrel rolled 5 brutal times before coming to rest upside down in the sand trap. Miraculously, she walked away with just a severe concussion and cracked ribs. But when the track technical inspectors looked at the wreckage, they found clear evidence of sabotage. Someone had intentionally used a hacksaw to partially cut through the steering shaft, weakening it just enough so it would snap under load. That is when things got really dark. The FBI quietly got involved. It turns out they had already been monitoring the situation for months due to interstate commerce implications. It was now a federal case of attempted murder. But Pam was done. You could see it directly in her eyes during the very last television interview she ever gave to the press. The pure, unadulterated joy of the sport was completely and entirely gone forever. The love of the sport had been forcibly replaced by fear, extreme paranoia, and absolute mental exhaustion. She formally announced her immediate retirement on October 1st, 1968. She was just 21 years old, and she walked away from a multi-million-dollar empire that she had built entirely from scratch with her own 2 hands. Now, you might be thinking that surely someone else just stepped up and took over the IDRF to keep the dream alive. But here is what most people don't realize about massive paradigm shifts. They usually require a singular visionary to hold them together. Without Pam's magnetic gravity, the entire organization folded within 6 short months. The lucrative television deal with ABC completely evaporated. The mainstream corporate sponsors immediately vanished like ghosts in the wind. It was almost as if the whole incredible thing had been a fever dream. The established racing bodies, perhaps completely unsurprisingly, instantly reversed all of their progressive, inclusive policies the exact second the competitive threat was neutralized. They went right back to their old, comfortable boys' club mentality. It would take another 15 long years before female drivers were truly, fundamentally accepted back into the highest echelons of professional drag racing. They essentially won the war by simply waiting for Pam Hardy to lose her life or her sanity, which is honestly the most pathetic, cowardly victory in the entire history of motorsports. So what actually happened to Pam Hardy? That is the ultimate million-dollar question that historians have been trying to answer for decades. She disappeared completely off the map. Some folks in the industry say she fled to Europe and continued racing under an assumed, untraceable name. Others confidently claim she went underground and became a highly paid mechanical engineer for one of the big 3 automakers in Detroit, secretly designing high-performance engine parts under a male pseudonym. There is even a wild yet strangely plausible theory that she actually went to work for NASA and that her unparalleled instinctual understanding of high-speed acceleration dynamics proved incredibly useful for the Apollo space program. The frustrating truth is that nobody knows for absolute sure. She vanished into thin air like tire smoke, taking all of her brilliant future innovations, all of her disruptive ideas, and all of her limitless potential right along with her. The very last officially confirmed sighting of Pam was at a dusty, run-down gas station out in Barstow, California in late November of 1968. According to the police report from the private investigators, she was driving a completely plain, unmarked white Dodge van heading east into the desert. The teenage gas station attendant only managed to recognize her because she had a highly distinctive, jagged scar across her right hand from an old welding accident in her dad's shop. She paid for her fuel in straight cash, did not utter a single word to the kid, and drove off into the blazing sunset. This is where it gets really interesting, though. In 2018, on the exact 50th anniversary of her sudden retirement from the sport, someone mysteriously left a massive bouquet of flowers directly at the starting line of every single major, historic drag strip remaining in Southern California. We are talking perfectly arranged pink roses tied with brilliant white silk ribbons. There was absolutely no card attached, no cryptic message, nothing but the flowers themselves. By the time the track managers arrived the next morning, the flowers were sitting there, and social media started absolutely buzzing. Everyone in the hardcore drag racing community was asking the exact same question. Was she back? I choose to believe she never really left us. I choose to believe that somewhere out there, Pam Hardy is still racing. Maybe not physically on a sanctioned track, and maybe not behind the wheel of a nitro-burning funny car, but racing nonetheless. She proved something that modern sports are still occasionally struggling to accept even 50 years later. She conclusively proved that raw mechanical speed has absolutely no gender, that brilliant engineering innovation has no age limit, and that true, unbreakable courage has no boundaries. Every single time you watch a driver interview on network television, you are seeing Pam Hardy's direct influence. Every time a major race features fireworks, dramatic music, and compelling storylines, that is Pam Hardy's playbook. The real tragedy here isn't just that she was unfairly forced out by terrified men. The real tragedy is that we as a society lost 50 years of potential automotive progress because the establishment could not handle being systematically dismantled by a teenager. So, if you ever find yourself walking through the pits at a drag strip on a Saturday night, just keep your eyes open. You never really know exactly who might be quietly watching the new generation from the dark shadows of the grandstands.